Good evening. Welcome to the Big Fight. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the program tonight, it's a question that affects millions of children across the country. Should vaccines for kids be a prerequisite to reopening schools? The fact of the matter is this: education at all levels has been ravaged by COVID. The digital divide that exists in this country means that a huge number of children are nowhere close to being able to afford a data connection, let alone a smartphone, to get an online education. And as we know, many of us as parents, an online education is hardly an education. The consequences of children being away from school is profound. Less interaction, no real education, the development of social skills getting hammered. And yet there are reports that this Delta variant is as contagious as chickenpox. Will our kids be safe without the vaccine? How much longer can we wait? We've got a fantastic panel tonight. We've got Rukmini Banerjee, the CEO of Pratham, Yamini Iyer, the President of the Centre for Policy Research, Professor Jean Drez, Dr. Rajiv Das Gupta, member of the National Adverse Effects Following Immunization Programme, Sudha Acharya, the Principal of ITL Public School, Triman Sodhi, a Class 10 student of Modern School Barakamba. It's always great to get student voices. Richa Kapoor, the parent of a Class 11 student and a Class 1 student. And also Dr. Anish T.S., a member of the expert panel for COVID in Kerala. I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. The first part of this program is called the first punch. And all of our panelists have exactly 1 minute to make their point, and then I start getting all rude and I start interrupting and doing things which other channels do. So, without any order of preference, let me go to Rukmini first. For the first punch, your time, Rukmini, starts now.
Thank you, Vishnu. It's right that I should be first because I'm from Pratham. And I think that our first priority should be to connect our children back to schools in a real way. What is that real way may vary from place to place, but I think the connection between teachers and children, between parents and teachers, is of very high priority. And I think that immediately, since teachers are already in school, we should start a rotation of parents coming to school, talking to teachers, and if both feel that they are in a good place and they feel the children can be safe, start bringing the children back to school in rotation, in a organized, safe way, so that we can start children coming back to school and starting their process of learning again.
All right, so there needs to be a process of communication. Kids need to come back. It needs to be systematic. Yamini, your time starts now. 1 minute. Go ahead.
We've found ways of opening gyms, of opening spas, of opening factories. Economic life is back to near normal now. The fact that we have not prioritized our schools and children says a lot about us as a society. The costs of closure of schools over these last 17 months, the psychological costs, the developmental costs, and the learning costs are visible and felt in every home. And there is enough research to tell us that these impacts are going to be long lasting. If we as a country prioritize our people and prioritize our children, we must find ways to open schools. The debate has to be about how, not when. We've been waiting for when for too long. It's now time for us to act.
Professor Jean Drez, go ahead with the first punch. Your time starts now.
Well, I agree substantially with what Rukmini and Yamini have said. I think we need to come to terms with the fact that a monumental injustice has been done to poor children by closing schools for as long as 16 months without making any serious arrangement for children who don't have access to online education. Here in Jharkhand, poor children have no meaningful access to online education, and they've basically been dropped like hot potatoes from the schooling system. And as a result of that, they are lapsing into illiteracy. This is what we found in the last 2 days in a survey of a village in Latehar district, where out of 36 children enrolled at the primary school level, 30 were unable to read even a single word. They could barely remember some letters, that they do remember, but they have lost the ability to remember how words are formed. So I don't think anything can be done for these children 2 more seconds, without opening the school in some fashion. That doesn't
All right,
mean that you
opening
can
the
resume
school
the
in
classes.
some fashion. I'm
Some
going to be
fashion,
mean, Dr. Drez.
Okay.
Dr. Rajiv Dasgupta, from a medical standpoint, is it safe for schools to be opening? 1 minute starts now.
Thank you. I shall go by the WHO advisory, which categorizes from a situational level 0 to situation level 4. Now let's talk of situation level 3, which is community transmission with limited additional capacity to respond to a risk of health services. Now that's what much of India is at present. It's another matter that the Indian government, which notifies community transmission, never did so, but even then, the advisory at this level is childcare services and primary and secondary schools should remain open with adequate safety and surveillance measures in place as long as the local context allows, and continuity of education for children for their overall health, well-being and safety should be at the forefront of all relevant considerations and decisions, and this would extend to Anganwadis as well. And situation level 4, which is the highest, it says consider all options for continuity of in-person learning, if not possible, limit blended, etc. Okay. So the advisory from WHO is loud and clear.
Got it. Sudha Acharya, principal of ITL Public School. Should children be allowed into schools without vaccination?
Yes, I 100% agree that schools should open immediately, at least for primary sections. And I would believe that for the whole school, because the learning loss or the learning gap, which has really happened, as Rukmini ma'am and Yamini ma'am said, it has a long-lasting impact. So many children have gone out of school ecosystem. We are coming to know about it. The children are nowhere around the school available to us even. And school is not only a place for cognitive learning, it is a place for socialization, and their mental health has been affected very badly during these 2 years. Because there is a beautiful family and school partnership which we have developed in this health emergency. And when in January, February, March, we were allowed to open school, we got 90% attendance in our school because parents came as partner. They were inside the school and taking care of entry, exit, and
all right. So
all these things.
A parent-school partnership important.
Yeah.
Triman Sodhi, class 10 student, modern school, Barakhamba Road. Do you think schools should open?
Yeah, I'll start with first of all, elementary schools in no circumstance should open, because you can't expect that children of such a young age could have the self-control to follow all the safety guidelines. So let's straight out cut them out of the equation. Next, I'll only be talking about high schoolers. And even if you open school for high school children, inevitably cases will rise, because as we know by WHO, they've already stated that the virus can be transmitted even if the person is not showing any symptoms. And so you would have no way of knowing if the person is infected or not. And even if you clean every single surface in the school, the virus is also airborne. So you'll have to clean the air, which is almost impossible. And this is me taking that the school, that the government will be able to provide protective gear for all of the students. But if the government can't provide PPE kits for their own doctors, how can you expect that they'll be able to provide protective equipment for millions of students?
Strong arguments from a class 10 student over there. We're going to refer to those. Richa Kapoor, a parent of a class 1 child and a class 11 child. Should schools open without kids being vaccinated, Richa?
So first of all, thank you for having me. And I really respect the opinion of all the eminent jury members over here. I understand the concerns and the huge loss that we have suffered during this time. But as a parent, I would like to voice my opinion that without vaccination, I would be very scared to send my children to school. So the big question we are asking here is that are they any safe in the class? But looking at the larger picture, I understand they aren't any safer outside. But systemically, we are not equipped to handle the sheer number. Considering the number of stakeholders involved here, we are talking about both public and private schools. Private schools may be able to find alternative solutions, but what about public schools where children, there are so many children in each class, a lot of them using public transport. You see them huddled onto rickshaws and autos trying to get to their schools. So how do we manage all of this?
Okay. Dr. Anish TS, member of the expert panel for COVID-19 in Kerala. Sir, Kerala has been very badly hit in this situation. In a situation like this, Dr. Anish, would you say that schools should be allowed to reopen? All right, we don't have him just yet, but let me just start the big fight and take my first question back to Rukmini. Now, you heard a class 10 student and you heard Richa, a parent of 2 kids. Firstly, in a school environment, do we seriously expect a child to have a mask on for several hours? If a mask is not on, a child is unvaccinated, that child is vulnerable.
So I would say that a lot of our rural schools have space around them. In any case, I think that if you plan it properly, I think this is all a question of planning. If you plan it properly, you don't need to have the whole class come at the same time for the whole day. You can break this up into smaller chunks. And I think actually that would be very good, especially for the kinds of things that Jean is talking about. Children have fallen way behind. They were not that great to begin with. And therefore, individualized attention or attention in small groups to children would be very beneficial. I also think that we are at a time when parents have been taking a much greater role in children's learning. And therefore, you know, if a child comes today and the next slot maybe is Wednesday, you can have actual real things go back with them, whether it is worksheets, whether it is notebooks, because I think all this stuff on WhatsApp.
Rukmini, what if a child is unwell and asymptomatic? There's a potential of other children being infected as well.
But we must remember, I think we should remember that children are already playing outside with each other. And I think that in a lot of our rural areas, mohalle mein bacche already khel rahe ek dusre ke sath.
But that doesn't make it safe.
They are just not coming to school.
That doesn't make it safe.
I think teachers should be vaccinated. We should have a very, high priority for teachers getting vaccinated.
All right, Richard, do you agree with what Rukmini says, that look, children are already playing in many places, so let's not stop the inevitable. Education should be inevitable.
I really feel that that is, in fact, even more reflective of the, the misinformation and the attitude that they think that they can be out and playing. So compliance becomes even more difficult.
Compliance becomes
more difficult. When they feel that it is, yes, because if they're out and they're playing, that completely shows that they are not aware of the kind of protocol that needs to be followed. So that is not a very valid argument, according to me, to put them in schools, that they're already playing outside.
Yamini, today there was a CDC report, or yesterday there was a CDC report which said that the Delta variant is as contagious as chickenpox. It's more contagious in many contexts than the common cold, Ebola and a whole lot of other scary illnesses. Assuming that that CDC report is correct, why are we putting our children in this danger without being vaccinated?
So I think there are 2 issues here. Number one, we know now that COVID-19 is here to stay. Vaccinated or not vaccinated, versions, variants are going to come and go. We have found ways of learning to live with COVID in our economic lives. It is appalling that as a society, we are not choosing to find ways to live with COVID to enable our children to have a proper education. There are different kinds, when that brings me to my second point, there are different kinds of parents. There are different kinds of ways in which we choose to make choices in the context of a pandemic. Some of these are personal, some of these are societal. We will have to induce a degree of flexibility. Everybody's concerns have to be taken on board, which means there is no one way of opening up schools. It cannot be done through diktat, sitting in New Delhi or sitting in a state capital. It has to be done taking in full confidence of parents, taking in full confidence and cognizance of the local scenario. COVID also doesn't
No, but Yamini, just to interrupt you, since this is the big fight, if a parent's body disagrees, I beg your pardon, if a school says the children have to come in and we've decided and the large number of parents agree, then those parents who disagree will not have a choice. So the opinion of parents is frankly a neither here nor there sort of situation. I don't think anything Richa has said is incorrect.
Absolutely. Nothing Richa has said is incorrect. And as a parent, I think that my children should go to school. The point is that we have to find ways of converting these into hybrid contexts, into being flexible. There will be times when schools can open. There will be times when some parts of schools can be open. There are times when everything will have to be locked down. And we'll have to find ways of being flexible around those.
Jean-Dres, we have a fairly poor vaccination program in terms of the number of Indian citizens who are vaccinated. In the rural context, across so many parts of the country, vaccination is nowhere close to the numbers that we need for adults. We are nowhere even close to children. So therefore, children are doubly vulnerable, some would argue. So therefore, when you say that children need to go back to learning because it's been disastrous otherwise, what's more important, education or potentially their lives?
I don't think this is the right way to pose the question, Vishnu. I think we should not confuse two questions. One question is whether the schools should reopen. And the second question is whether and what kind of classes can be held. On the first question, I don't think there can be two answers, because reopening the schools is the only way to reach out to the majority of poor children who don't have access to online education. Online education is a fiction for poor children. And education is a fundamental right. Now, if you reopen the school, first of all, the teachers will be there. In rural India, the teachers don't live in the village where they teach. If the school is not open, they are going to stay in their home 10 or 15 kilometers away. If the school opens, at least they will be in the community. They will be able to meet the parents. They will be able to check the children's homework. They will be able to supervise a midday meal. They will be able to do something. If you close the school, you are saying that there's nothing the teachers can do for these children who are offline.
Professor Dres, there's no one's questioning the value of education. There's more important than anything else. I'm just trying to ask, in the middle of a healthcare
some people
crisis,
are questioning whether the
where
school
India
should
may
be reopened.
progressively go into a phase 3, potentially we aren't even through with the phase 2. Look at the situation in Kerala. Should we seriously be talking about reopening schools for children without vaccination? It's a healthcare situation.
I must bring up a point that has already been made, that in rural India, you see, there are two important differences we have to understand between middle-class children and poor children. One is that online education works fine, or at least to some extent. I don't think it's great, but at least it works to some extent for middle-class children. For poor children, it's a fiction. And the second point is that when the middle-class children are not in school, they are relatively safe. They are in homes where there's no crowding and where parents understand what corona is about, what precautions are required, and so on. When poor children find themselves shut out of the school, they mill around in a village where there's plenty of crowding, where people don't wear masks, they don't keep distance, they don't know much about corona and precautions. And by the way, many of them also go to private tuitions if they can afford it. If they can afford it, they go to private tuitions held in terrible conditions of hugely overcrowded, small.
So therefore, a school setting which is regulated is better. Is that what you're suggesting?
Sorry?
You're suggesting that a school setting is better, right? Because it's more regulated. As compared to private education.
I think it's not worse.
It's not worse.
Precautions that can be taken. And then we can discuss what kind of class can be held. You know, in a small village, let me give you an example. In a small village of, let's say, 100 households, which is the case of many villages in India, if you were to hold the classes of different grades on different days of the week from Monday to Friday, you would have a very small number of children. You would have 2 or 3 classrooms for them. You could do that quite safely.
Okay.
Something can be done for them.
All right. So again, a pragmatic way in finding out something which balances education and health and the future of these children. Dr. Dres, I take that point. But I want to go to Dr. Dasgupta first, because the larger question on vaccines and children, we've seen children being vaccinated in other parts of the world. It's really unfortunate that those vaccines which can be inoculated, given to children, are not in our country. It's somehow that, you know, our children are from another planet, it seems almost. But be that as it may, there's Covaxin, there's Biological E coming out with a vaccine as well. Are these going to be safe? Because a lot of parents would want that to be the primary issue. Vaccines have not been here before. Do they really work? And will my children be safe? What is your answer to them?
Well, there are 2 or 3 aspects to it. First, as the health minister announced, the vaccine for children would be available August onwards. But vaccines don't save lives, vaccinations do. So there's a long distance between vaccine and vaccination. So even if it is available in August, vaccination program is not going to roll out overnight if in any substantial numbers. The issue, as one of our panelists said, is about vaccinating teachers and staff in the school. In fact, today in the Conversation Australia, I've written an article on the inequities in Indian vaccination prioritization. And in many countries, teachers and school personnel are a priority category, as would be Anganwadi workers and so on. So that's something which is doable and which should receive urgent attention. Now, on the other hand, opening of schools doesn't mean it's business as usual or schooling as usual. There are a set of administrative requirements, a set of classroom requirements, a set of school level requirements. But those are a whole lot of details. But central to all of these are two things. One is communication, and communicating in a manner that's inclusive, that addresses linguistic and cultural diversity, and actually keeping the administration and the parents together as a unit. Now that's easier said than done, but that's got to be done if schooling is to receive the primacy that it deserves.
Okay. Triman, let me put a tough question to you. You've got all these scholars and all around you and Professor Jean Drez, and you're just a class 10 student, but I think your answers have been fantastic. Let me ask you this. Would a system work where, as many schools have already planned, a certain number of students would come into school for a very limited number of hours to begin with? There'd be spacing, which happens in many schools in our cities. On many days, these children wouldn't be in school, they'd be back home. So a hybrid model to start with. Do you think, Triman, that would work?
No, a hybrid model could also not work. Like, this is one of the most controversial things I've heard. First of all, like schools are doing nowadays is they're asking families that if you want to send your kids, you can, and if you don't want to, don't. But that won't work out because families from under the poverty line who can't afford to keep their children at home will be forced to send their children to school, right? And these children come from poor places. They will most likely not have health insurance. They'll have grandparents living in their house, which will in turn bring the virus to the most vulnerable parts of the country.
Right. That's also an important point. Yamini, you want to take that on? That children who are infected come back to their homes, pass it on to their grandparents, pass it on to their parents and others. In the Indian context, large families living together. So there is, there's that worry as well.
I'm not an epidemiologist. I can't comment
too much
on disease transmission.
If you aren't vaccinated, the chances are that you are more susceptible, right? So.
There are.
Can I answer that?
I'll come to you in 1 second, but Yamini, go ahead, and then Doctor, I'll come to you next. Yes.
There are risks, but I think that just as we have found ways to make it viable to function in different aspects of our economic life, we can make it viable to function in our schools too. A large proportion of Indian schools are actually constructed in ways where windows can be opened, ventilation can be organized at relatively low cost. It is not about opening the entire school. The entire classroom doesn't have to come on every given day. Bubbles can be created. Students can come on a rotation basis. And teachers and schools will have to work in collaboration with parents. That's why parents have to be at the heart and center of this whole thing, both to build confidence and to design appropriate protocols that make sense in the particular context of when the school is being opened and the particular context of the kinds of children that are coming into schools. It has to be a collaborative effort, but it has to be an effort that says we need to do this and we will find ways to do it.
But that's based on the assumption that parents actually respond and they actually understand the dangers and they follow the rules.
In the event that parents do not want to send their children to school, the school and parents can also collectively come together to find ways of ensuring
Rukmini had a point.
Doctor,
I'll come to you in a moment. Rukmini, go ahead.
I think, Vishnu, it's important to look at what states are doing, because I think that over the last 1 year, we've learned a lot. Now, for example, in Delhi, in the last 2 weeks, they've been having parent-teacher meetings in the government schools, and very large numbers of parents are going because you want to discuss this matter and you want to be assured. In Punjab, for example, during the time that the pandemic was going on, pre-primary children and primary school children's parents were invited, materials were given. So I think that this has been it is a great opportunity for building this parent-teacher trust at the local level, because we should also not think that schools opening and shutting is like a light switch which goes on and off. There are going to be times in the coming months and hopefully, I hope not in the coming year, when we'll have to shut schools suddenly because the positivity rate goes up or there's another surge. We'll have to do things in a very flexible way. And therefore, I think local trust between
so that's
the
an
key
important
adults.
point. Open schools while the going is good and shut them down immediately when you need to. That's what you're saying, Rukmini?
And I think you have to learn how to do these things locally, quickly, sensibly, with trust.
Richa, would that, as a parent, does that work for you? For example, here in Delhi now we are seeing very few cases.
Absolutely.
So it's okay. Would you be okay with your child going to school now?
So if we are looking at it, we are not like back to business as usual, and like how ma'am just mentioned. So when we are talking about trust, we are talking about bubble groups, how we are talking about, just taking each situation differently. It's not a blanket approach, then probably it might work.
Okay. Dr. Dasgupta, go ahead with the point you were mentioning.
Okay, 2 points. First, the transmission level in schools, and this is based on global experience so far in the last 1.5 years. The transmission level among school children have never been higher than the transmission level in the community. In other words, if the community transmission is high, only then the risk among school children is higher, not the other way around. And second, and the second is actually more important, which is that children below 12 years and the older children and adolescents are quite distinct groups biologically or from the point of view of infection dynamics. So older children and adolescents above 12 behave almost exactly like adults as far as susceptibility and transmission goes. Children below 12, it's much safer to start opening with that group while the processes are being institutionalized. So that would be the pragmatic way forward.
Professor Drez, that's an interesting proposition based on science, that actually, despite what we might conventionally believe, younger children in this scenario may be relatively less vulnerable to picking up an infection, and therefore if we are doing this smartly, let young kids go to school first.
That sounds good. Vishnu, I think one problem with this debate is that we are not able to feel the desperation of rural parents, poor parents especially, to send their children back to school. I want to say that because it was said earlier in this show that many parents are against their children going back to school. That may be true of some middle-class parents, and personally, I would not force any parent to send their children to school. I think if they want to study online, I would not object to that for the time being at least. But in my experience, at least in rural Jharkhand, the vast majority of poor parents are absolutely desperate to send their children back to school because they have no hope for their children to have a better life than their own, other than education. And now their children are being dropped from the schooling system like hot potato, and condemned to a life of illiteracy and hard labor. I think they're really desperate to see a way out of that. And right now they can't see any way. They can't afford smartphone, they can't afford private tuitions. Even if they have a smartphone, they may not know how to guide the child to follow online education. So I think that for these people, we really must open the schools in some fashion as soon as possible.
Professor Drez, there's a fascinating study which you were involved with and you came out with in the last couple of days, which showed that among those you questioned, children have forgotten even the most basic things. You referred to that. Could you tell us in a little bit more detail how in rural parts of Jharkhand, where this study took place,
yes,
what you actually saw?
So I'm actually speaking today under the influence of that experience, because for 2 days we talked to parents and children in a small Dalit Adivasi village of Latehar district in Jharkhand. And by the way, it's not the worst at all in that area. It's actually a pretty well-connected village with a school right in the village and a teacher who's actually not so bad. He goes from house to house and tell parents ki बच्चों को बढ़िया से पढ़ाइए and that kind of thing. But what are parents supposed to do? So out of 36, as I said earlier, out of 36 children enrolled in primary schools in that village, we found that 30 have lost the ability to even read one simple full word. They can barely recognize letters. We found only one child who is studying online. And we found that
Professor Dres, in what class were they?
This is primary school, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so up to 5.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, unable to recognize in many cases more than 1 or 2 letters.
Including many class 5 children. And let us remember, put yourself in the position of somebody who has a child enrolled in class 4. Or let us say last year they were in class 4. Their actual level was probably 3 or 2 because they were not really able to follow the curriculum. Now they have lost, they've forgotten much of what they have learned, so now they may be actually class 1 level, but they are being promoted automatically to class 5. In class 5 in Jharkhand, you have to start reading thick English textbooks with sentences that even the teacher, I'm sure, is not able to understand. Now this child who is not able to read one word in Hindi, you are now expecting that they will read an English textbook. This doesn't make any sense at all. So this is the situation that people find themselves in. And every single parent we talked to was absolutely in favor of the schools being reopened as soon as possible. I think that's important to understand.
Sudha Acharya, let's move away from education and let's just look at social skills. As the principal of a school, how important is it for children to connect with other children, to build on their social skills, which is as important as education in many senses?
Yeah, that's the most important thing. I focused on social and emotional learning of children. I would just say today's happening, few parents who have really special need children, they are the worst sufferers because in the absence of school, parents are not getting any respite. School was the only time when parents got some respite, and these children were getting one-to-one support in the school, some therapy and all those things were going on. Now parents are desperate to send their children to the school so that they don't miss out on their therapy and we can take care of their mental health also. As far as I know, the adolescent children right from 11, 12, their social skills, their aggression, depression, feeling low, anxiety attack, these have become so common. I mean, they find that how they can express themselves, they are unable to express their emotions, their feelings. So we try to connect with them and try to bond with them. For me, in my school, I think all of them are desperately, they want to come to school. If you want, I really agree with Professor that there are so many solutions. Pragmatically, schools can open in bubbles, as ma'am said, that small children, and then why not children taking ownership of their own learning? When children, when school opened for a brief time period, we really created structured peer leaders who were really showing hand to the class 9th and 10th, 12th class. They're saying if somebody is taking out mask or washing hand and something, why not we train our children to deal with their youngsters? So children, let children take their own ownership of their own learning. And social learning, as you said, parents are complaining to us that they are remaining in their room, they don't eat, they don't sleep, the whole routine of eating, sleeping and that hygiene completely, no physical activity at all, and physically both social well-being, physical, mental, psychological, everything has affected. So we are having 24/7 helpline from our school side also. Continuously we are counseling children. Some of the children are saying, we don't want to stay in our house. To the counselor, they are saying, can we come to the school for one day and visit our classroom? Can we go around our canteen and playground? Today, few children came with parents for one-to-one therapy in the school. I could not say no because it was very, very urgent. So there are some children who really come back, who really should come back to school. And we can find out staggered timing, and even in senior classes also, I think that school should reopen. We can think today physics, accounts and history students will come. Tomorrow maybe chemistry, biology and economics students will come. There are 100 ways. And staggered timing, and a small group of children can come. So if we think and believe that schools should reopen, there are so many ways how it is possible.
Okay. Professor Drez, you know, it's so interesting that you know you've got progressive principles like Sudha Acharya from a school which offers facilities, the ability of children to connect even when school is shut, essentially trying to work on, you know, the emotional skills of a child, or building an emotional connect with a child in a situation like this. Children in a village don't have that luxury. In the areas that you work, Professor Drez, those 5, 6, 7 hours in school was productive energy where children would come together, they'd learn, they'd socialize. In the last year and a half, what have children done in the areas that you work when school has been shut down?
Vishnu, I don't know about other states, but I can tell you that in Jharkhand, the teachers don't have any specific instructions to do anything for the offline children.
Mm-hmm.
What they do is once in a while they forward by WhatsApp some material for the children who have access to online schooling. I'm talking of the primary level.
Right.
So I'm sure that every teacher has a list of phone numbers and they send some material online. The children who are offline, they have no specific instructions for them, or if there are instructions, they are symbolic because the teachers don't seem to know about them, and I've talked to quite a few teachers. And by the way, even the online material doesn't seem to go very far because, as I mentioned earlier, in that village that we surveyed, there was only one child who was studying online. I'm sure that the teacher is sending his online material to more than one child because there are smartphones in some households in that village. But you know, it's one thing to have a smartphone in the house, but then you need connectivity. If you have connectivity, you need to have money for data, and it's not so cheap. And even if you have a smartphone and you have connectivity and you have data, the child still has to know how to learn online. So what we found is that even in the few houses where there was a smartphone, the children were not learning online. So I think these are the realities that we have to be aware of. And I don't think we can possibly accept a situation where nothing is done for the offline children. Education is a fundamental right under the Indian Constitution. You cannot run away from that.
Rukmini, shouldn't we at least vaccinate teachers and you know, those in school?
Absolutely. I think that I already said that vaccinating teachers should be a top priority. I want to just add to what John is saying, that even if you are going to get an SMS, not even forget about smartphones, even if you have to get an SMS, you have to be able to read. You have to be able to read, your parents have to be able to read. And I think that this assumption that I will send material in whatever form and that will constitute learning, I think is a mistake, and we should understand that. I would like to say that we need to open our schools immediately so as to be able to prepare for times when schools will be closed again. Schools have material in school. We need to open the cupboards, have the books rotating in the community, do organized ways in which, when schools will need to be shut again, we won't be in the situation we are in today. So I see 3 kinds of scenarios. One is when you're in a complete lockdown and you can't do anything and you have to be at home. The second is when there is restricted mobility, where locally, like we have now, there are teachers are coming to school, they're going into the mohalla, they're often visiting children's families, especially in the government schools in some states. And the third is when everybody can start freely coming to school. 3 scenarios, and then 3 other ways of thinking. There is a home, there is a mohalla, and there is a school. And I think that as principal was saying, permutation combinations pragmatically done, support of parents, support of teachers, we can do a lot more based on the experiences that we've already had. We don't need to be in this sort of, 0 or 1. Nothing is happening or everyone comes back to school. I think we've learned that we can do things in a much more flexible way.
Yamini, just 1 second. Professor Drez, really quickly make your point before I go to my other panel.
Yeah, just to add a very quick argument for reopening schools. It's not the most important argument by any means, but it is relevant that the school buildings are falling apart.
Right.
16 months without any maintenance. Right now it's pouring heavily day after day in Jharkhand. You can imagine the seepage in the government schools, and there's nobody around to do anything about it. And that is, that is another consideration. Not the most important one, but it's another.
That's an important point.
At least reopening the school.
Has anybody thought about that? Yamini, go ahead.
So just to further the point that Jean said, and picking up on what Rukmini was saying, for schools to be able to make use of that opportunity of restricted movements, some opening for children and teachers and parents to come together in the physical building, schools need to have access to resources, both for maintenance, both to ensure that learning material is available, both to ensure that the possibilities of parent-teacher meetings can be organized of children coming to school. That means that at a policy level, we have to invert the pyramid of how we fund our education system. For the bulk of government schools, our centralized model is such that schools receive, elementary schools receive somewhere between 3 to 4% of the budget, and secondary schools receive about 1%, over which they have expenditure discretion. We need to invert that pyramid to give far more expenditure autonomy to schools, this can be done through the panchayats, this can be done through the school management committees, this can be done through the district administrations where school management committees and panchayats are not strong enough. It can be decentralized. These decisions can be taken between states and districts, but schools need to be able to have resources to meet their needs, and that means that our policies need to change.
Interrupting because I just wanted to wrap this up. Richa, on the basis of what you have heard on this program and so many of these special, have you changed your mind slightly? You don't have to. I'm not suggesting you should.
So the desperation is real, but so is the fear.
All right.
Yes. So my children go to a progressive school where there are a lot of permutations and combinations being worked out, and teachers are putting in umpteen efforts to make sure that their academics are not being compromised on, or there are various times when they want to keep up with extracurricular activities. But the real question is that the people who are worst affected, is there something that can be really worked out there?
No, I share your fear, and I must confess, as a parent myself, my elder one is now going to college, my younger one is just in class 7, and I share Richa's concerns. I share Richa's concerns. I worry about sending my child back to school. I've expressed that to the school as well, but I mean, I've learned a lot from this program. But I just need to wrap this up with by going across to young Triman. I think he should have the last word on this program. Now, Triman, you've heard a lot of people over here saying that, schools are important. I mean, I'm sure you agree, but schools should be open now and children should be reintroduced in a smart way. I mean, do you agree with them? Is there any anything that you will take back from this conversation?
Yeah, 100% I'll agree that education is important. Nobody is doubting that. But I'll just say the cons of opening schools right now way overburden the pros, because I don't think the country can take another wave of COVID because we just dealt with one.
Okay, that's actually a very valid point. Would we be having this conversation if we were in the middle of a third wave of COVID? What do doctors actually say about the possibility of that taking place? Are we having this conversation now because the situation is far better? And let's be honest, we are. It is a fact that across India, other than a few states and a large number of districts, the situation is okay. But let's just hope that that remains the way. Otherwise, conversations like this would end up being futile. And again, I think it really boils down to vaccination. We need to vaccinate our adults and we need to vaccinate our children as well. Not just vaccines, but vaccination. As the doctor mentioned, Dr. Das Gupta, that needs to be the big focus. It's only then that we can have a true education in the way that we want it. I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us.